Screenless. The TV drama is imagined. The work and the guests are real. Making a soundtrack.
Opening scene and action!
We're sounding a little bit different today because I've come to visit Dan.
Hey!
Yeah. So I came to Folkestone, which I arrived at 7:15 this morning. Went straight to the harbour, saw the sunrise. It was absolutely beautiful.
It is lovely.
And then, so we're in Dan's lovely studio. So if you go to the social medias, I'm sure we'll probably put a picture up.
Yeah.
And us being in the same room, which is a very rare thing.
Very lovely thing,
So,
huh?
what are we doing this morning, Dan?
So-
Why am I here?
Well, we thought it would be a very good idea to review the music so far.
Yeah.
So we're going to listen back to everything, make some notes, and see if there are any changes, any improvements we want to make.
Yeah. And then probably at the same time, think about the mixing and any mixing notes that we can make for ourselves. Or for you doing the mixing.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have a guest coming over that we're going to be
Yes.
chatting with. Do you want to mention anything?
Yeah. So it's Peter Blach. He's a director, and Peter and I worked together last year on Seagull, which was his feature debut. So we're going to talk about communication.
Yeah, that's going to be the theme for this episode, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Communication, because it has come up a lot with
Time and time
every
again,
guest. It's
yeah.
all about, a good line of communication can change everything.
Absolutely.
Cue the music.
We didn't have your singing in the opening scene, Dan.
Oh no. What are we going to do?
Maybe you can do it now.
All right.
We can't have an episode without it, really, can we?
Cue the music. Just a short one. Just a short one.
Is that it? Okay.
That's
okay. So we are leaping forwards in time to Wednesday.
Yes.
The opening scene was on Monday.
Yep.
We're now on Wednesday, but we'll be going back in time for the behind the scenes because that was on Monday as well.
Because we recorded that on Monday as well, yeah.
So on Monday, we drank lots of tea.
We did drink a modicum of tea.
Yes. You gave me a tour around your, I would say house. It's more like a small city.
Yeah, one of the kids' friends came over, and as they were leaving the house, when their parents picked them up, they went, "Daddy, Daddy, Eve lives in a castle."
It does feel a bit that way. I think my house could fit in your living room. Oh, well, when you said this is the spare living room.
Yeah, I know. Look,
But that's one of 4 or 5 living rooms?
yes, and there's a very long-winded story as to why we have such a huge place. To quote Ghostbusters, when we bought it, it was a unique fixer-upper opportunity.
And the parts that you have fixed up look rather lovely.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, so we drank lots of tea.
We drank lots
We
of
went
tea.
up to your studio,
We popped up
which
to the
is really
studio.
nice.
Yep.
And we went through each track, just listening for bits we could improve for the music.
Yeah.
And making the odd little tweak here and there if it was easy to do on the fly.
Yeah, kind of continuity stuff, because we're at a point now where I think we kind of started off with an idea, but I think we've properly realised that idea now. Having been a few tracks in, I think really we knew that idea and we were always heading there, but I think there's been a turning point with this once we got past the liminal zone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not going to do the voice. Once we got past that and then did track 7, the aftermath one, I think we realised that because it was so different from what we kind of envisioned, we envisioned this big clash, and of course it became a coming together of the characters. So we then wanted to go back and just make sure that everything else, sound-wise and style-wise, was all sitting nicely together.
Yes, I suppose from tracks 1 to 7, it's kind of a rounded sound now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we can take a step back and go, right, let's sculpt a little bit and make sure that everything's running through. It's got continuity.
Yeah.
And sounds the same.
Yeah, and because we're almost 3/4 of the way through it now, so...
Yes. And so, yeah, we made some notes for mixing as well.
Yep.
Just little things, actually. I don't think you'll be starting from scratch. I think it'll be more, this is a bit too high, or I could add a reverb to this.
Exactly,
or,
yeah. Can you push that a bit? It's more about that than it is that. And as cool as that is, can you turn it down a bit? Because it's hitting me in the face.
Yeah. Well, there was a moment in track 4, actually, where you have a right-hand piano part that comes in with a pad, and I think it was getting a bit lost with the pad, and it was just about pulling the pad down a bit. And
a little bit of sculpting with EQ will sort that out.
Yeah. And so we have a work in progress album to listen to, short of tracks 9, 10, and 2, which is the theme tune, which we have yet to
sing the theme tune.
Tackle.
The theme tune.
We did talk about it.
We did talk a little bit about it, but we did kind of run out of time as well.
Yeah, and a couple of these tracks we've kind of mulled over for a little while, haven't we, before? So we've got an idea of how to approach it, but it's about just doing it. But we might get together again for that.
Yeah.
And we also reviewed track 8.
Yes.
So it was a track of build before we're coming up to another event in track 9. So this was your track to approach, Dan?
It was, yeah.
What was going through your mind?
Well, it's a difficult one because obviously we were thinking this is a build, and before we've had we've had basically a hit point. We've had something to go towards, whereas with a build, it's just the build up to it. So I was quite unsure really how to approach it because I didn't want to put too much in, but at the same time it, wants to be interesting so that you want to listen to it. Yeah, so I found it a little difficult to get started. We had an idea, didn't we? We wanted to re-establish that new theme at the beginning, and then we wanted to reintroduce that ostinato from the very first track.
Yeah.
And so I had an idea of what to do with that, but once I started putting it in, I sort of flim-flammed about a bit, not really knowing what to do, kept moving it about, until eventually I settled on sort of orchestrate it. I think it was you actually that came up with the idea. You said, why don't you just have it sort of the ostinato dance around the string section a bit? So you can have different bits doing bits and then they can slowly sort of come together. And I was doing that and I was adding some synth to it underneath, some bass synth. And I'd got, I thought if I, on the basses, added the new theme underneath, it would be very subtle, but it would be there. So you'd have the ostinato and the new theme, and because it was lower down, it's slightly more menacing, so that something's not quite right. And I kind of accidentally stumbled across a new theme, which kind of isn't a new theme at all. It's literally just the notes from the ostinato.
I think that's perfect though, because we wanted to reintroduce this ostinato from the introduction. And so you've taken it, you've reintroduced the ostinato as a recognisable thing, but also it's almost like pulling back the curtain to this massive thing that's related to that.
Yeah, and I just built it. So it starts off on the violas with, like I say, the basses are doing the new theme. The piano is continuing with a ostinato throughout. And I started on the violas and then slowly spread it out. I think the celli do some of the notes from the ostinato until eventually, and so this theme starts on the viola and slowly spreads to all of them, and then at the end, for the last, I think it's 4 bars, it's just all in unison.
Yeah, it becomes a very, very powerful tool by everything slowly just being, it's almost like it's a massive magnet, and
everything's getting pulled.
It's just getting pulled into this theme. So yes, it becomes, just hit the brief spot on, I think, because it becomes about then what happens.
Yeah.
You haven't hit a point where it's gone, right, resolution, that's it, done. It ends in a very uncertain way.
And that was the difficult thing, I think, getting my head around that, because I think, you naturally want to finish things. You want to wrap everything up in a nice, neat bow, and for it to, even if it's a horrible bow, but you want to you want to wrap it up, and so that you know exactly where you're going.
The worst wrapped present.
The worst wrapped present ever. Yeah. But yeah, so you
Not that bow, it's too beautiful.
that bow is far too beautiful for them. So yeah, you need to finish things, and I think it's a very natural thing to want to see something through to its conclusion. And so with this, I had to not do that because the next track, the start of the next track, will be the thing.
Yeah.
This is just leading up to this next track. So
now, the thing I keep going backwards and forwards on for track 9 is you've made these the new theme has very long notes, very purposeful, very loud, very forceful.
yeah,
So what I'm going backwards and forwards on for track 9 is, do I start there? And if I start there, where do I go from that? Or do I drop it back down? So I'm using this new theme, but maybe in a subtler way. It's going to be a track of combat.
yeah,
So it's going to be track 7's theme against, I don't know, we're going to have to call this theme something, aren't we? But this new theme. So I guess I'm kind of leaning towards the subtlety of combat and, in musical terms, counterpoint, them dancing around each other. So I guess I'd need to make it a bit more subtle, quick, but it needs to have that power as well.
Yeah, I guess you could start with a shock, a kind of a fright, some sort of
Yeah, that could be good.
definitive start, which would do two things. Number one, obviously, straight away it grabs your attention. It would work very well after the end of the tracks running together, because you'd have this thing. And it also, if you do something like that, it can give you the space just to have a little breather. So you can have a and then you can have a little bit of a breather before then deciding what you want to do with the themes.
Yeah. Where do we want track 9 to end up?
Is it the series cliffhanger?
Well, track 10 is going to be the resolution for this album, isn't it?
Resolution, yeah.
So I suppose the fallout from track 9. But yes, the question remains, we're having this combat. What's the end result of that combat? I mean, I could just see where it goes and see if it fits.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking something fairly fast, fairly fraught.
Yep.
With these kind of powerful surges, forceful stabs at each other.
Because we've had some sort of stuff that has, you can tell it's on a mission, it's got a purpose, but we've not really had anything particularly upbeat.
Yeah.
Maybe not upbeat. Upbeat's the wrong.
Yeah.
But we've not had anything that's been
Up-tempo.
particularly up tempo. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I shall sit and scratch my head for half a day, no doubt.
Yeah, well, that's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think the key is, like you've experienced, is just sit with it for a while, and don't just write for writing's sake. It's thinking about it logically, but also it's got to feel right, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got the luxury of time on this a little bit. Not a massive amount, but, if you were actually scoring something, then you never have the luxury of time. But with this, we can do a little bit of backwards and
You
forth.
do have the luxury of a picture, though, which we don't.
Yes, this is very true.
I think that's probably the biggest challenge, isn't it? The biggest challenge that we've faced is that we're not writing to anything, so we're having to...
Yeah, which is why it's important for us to talk it through so much.
Yes, and switching on our mind tellies.
I know a lot of people have difficulty with... When you've been doing music to picture for a long time, and I do know composers that find it very difficult to write without the picture, but that's never been the case for me. I always talk through it, always have an idea, but I don't find... It's that double-edged sword, isn't it, the picture?
Absolutely.
It's great because it gives you, it does, in a way, absolutely dictate what you can do.
But I suppose we've replaced that with, like you say, talking things through probably in more detail than you would with a picture, so that we're happy with the direction of a track, and then we can go away and do that.
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's very important. This episode is all about communication, and this is part of the working process for us.
Yeah.
Talking through it. And I think if we were scoring a show together, we would talk about the episodes, and we would talk through the moods, themes and everything, what's going on in the characters' heads, all that kind of stuff. And
yes, very much so. But I just mean that without the luxury of having, watching through an episode and having those given to us, we're having to kind of make these things up for ourselves. So we're having to talk about it more, I suppose, than we would.
Yeah.
And therefore, communicating is key for us in that sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
So our marvellous guests have all talked about communication over the course of our series, which is part of the reason we wanted to do an episode dedicated to communication. So, yeah, just thinking back, Rob McCallum, communication for him was subtle, as time is always a factor on these big productions. So for him, communication has to be very clear and concise so everyone can get on with what they need to. What about Andrea?
Well, Andrea, she mentioned that communication was hugely important to make sure that you were basically in tune with each other, so that you're all singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, and actually just to work out whether it's a partnership that's, going to work. Do you want to work with that person?
Yes, so getting it right very early on.
Yeah.
Tristan talked about demystifying the processes around making music. So for him, actually communicating those messages to other composers and new composers via, he's written a book, he's got a Facebook page. He is so open to having conversation with anyone, isn't he, about anything to demystify the process. So
Absolutely,
for him, communicating those messages is really important.
I think Sam mentioned things about when things aren't going right, not basically burying your head in the sand, making sure that you communicate, because it only gets worse if you're not communicating with someone and something's bugging you. It's, that's just life. Never mind just working. It's not just a working relationship. That's for any relationship. Talking about things is key. So Sam mentioned that, and I think it was about us working together. Which is very very similar to you and I working together, Gareth. Lots of talking through things and making sure that we were. As all collaborations, if it works, you always end up with something that you would never have dreamt of doing.
But also, like you say, if things aren't going right, saying so, communicating that actually it's okay to want help. Yeah. That's why you're collaborating. It's two brains are better than one kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Steve Hughes, director, he talked about communication being key on set. He even goes so far as getting people to swap jobs on set to fully understand the collaborative process, which is only going to help, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. They do, it's the old saying, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, isn't it? And you don't really know until you've done something exactly what the pressures and everything are. So that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So Lucy mentioned communication between departments. I think she was talking about sort of the sound department and the composer, making sure that they were on the same wavelength, because it's something that I've mentioned before, where you're doing a scene and the music just gets buried because there's a load of explosions or this, that, and the other. So I think Lucy mentioned that, how important that can be to make sure that all the SFX and everything else, everybody works in conjunction, so that all the cogs are working rather than one of them going off by themselves.
And Melton Baytok, Foley artist, she was talking about working with a sound recorder. She doesn't actually do all the technical stuff herself. She's the artist. She's in there with the car door or the pair of shoes or, so she's concentrating 100% on the sound. And so she's really relying on the sound recordist to capture what she's doing. So the communication between her and the sound recordist is vital,
Simon mentioned communicating with the on-set musicians. He said it was key to make sure that the music is as believable as possible to camera, because obviously if you think about this massive thing they're recording, and then the last thing they need is some bozo on the in the background holding a cello and he's got the bow the wrong way around or something, it's
massaging that CV.
Yes, indeed, as he mentioned.
I've got grade 1 trumpet.
I once touched a stylophone.
Nice. It does lead us very nicely to our behind the scenes today, because we're going to be talking about communication with Peter Blach. You mentioned in the opening scene that Peter and you have worked together.
Yes, indeed.
On Peter's debut feature film, which is all based in Folkestone, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it was all shot around here.
It's really interesting.
It looks very nice, if I say so myself. Obviously, I had nothing to do with how it looks.
Yeah,
but,
no, that sounds like a really cool project to be involved with. Okay, should we go behind the scenes?
Let's go behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes.
Peter grew up in Denmark and came to the UK in his early 20s to work in the TV industry. He trained in post-production and later progressed into production, working on Dancer in the Dark by Lars von Trier and reality shows for TV. In 2000, he started producing content for pioneering internet companies and later founded Clip Films, a production company to serve the corporate, arts and public sector. Throughout his career, he has written, directed and produced many short films, of which some have screened at international film festivals. 2 of his short films were nominated for the Time Out Award, both Meet in 2007 and Preacher in 2008, and in 2016 he shot his first feature film, Seagull. Welcome to the podcast, Peter Blach.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And it's lovely all being in the same room, isn't
It's
it?
lovely / a little bit
Weird.
We're usually on Skype.
But this is first for me, so for me it's completely normal.
That's fantastic.
Great. So, Peter, when did you first start directing, and at what point did you decide that directing was going to be your raison d'etre?
So I came to the UK in '94. I did a media training course, and then I think I had it for about a year. I thought I was going to be an actor, and then at some point I decided it was going to be more fun behind the camera, and then I arrived in London and had to survive, and I found a runner job in post-production, and then I started making my first short film in the spare time. In fact, my first short film was shot and edited on VHS.
Wow.
That says something about my age. Anyway, I think that was back in 95, 96. It was many years after that before I actually decided I was going to be a film director. But I always had dreams of wanting to do it, but I never thought it could be a reality. I don't know, maybe sometime around... In fact, in 2003, I left my my full-time job to go freelance, and the aim was to spend more time on my own work. So it was probably at that point I decided to take the plunge and become a freelancer and really dedicate myself more to fiction writing and directing.
Were there influences early on in your life that led you to that dream of being a director? Particular films or TV or anything like that, or stories?
So I came to loving the medium of film quite late in my life. I think in my late teens, I was probably watching more theatre than I was watching films, and I couldn't name any famous film director in those days. I mean, obviously, Star Wars and, Rambo and Terminator and all those things that everybody else watched, I watched, but I couldn't really tell you who directed what or anything. I think the first film experience I had when I thought, wow, that was really mind-blowing, was Natural Born Killers.
Okay, yeah.
By, what's his name, Stone?
Oliver Stone.
Yeah, by Oliver Stone. And it was such a mix of medium. It was like cartoon, theatre, TV soap, action, all kinds of stuff mixed into one film that, and I came out of that going, wow, that was just amazing. I think maybe at that point I was thinking it would be really cool to do something like that.
Yeah. So coming into the present day, what's the communication like on set when you're working in a typical day, would you say?
So the way I approach directing, the way I see myself as director, so I've always wanted to do direct because I love working with actors. I also love, putting images together with music and telling stories, but I'm much more excited about working with actors than about putting lenses on a camera. And so it was always that was the driving force behind me wanting to direct. And just reminding myself, coming back to your question, which was how communication works. Yeah. So the way I approach directing is, I think the job of the director, when I direct, is to make sure that everybody works to their best abilities. So it's probably less for me about being creative and being the genius behind it. It's more about making sure that everybody is heard and everybody gets an opportunity to put their spin on things and be proud of what they produce.
So communication for you is key, really, on a when
Yeah,
you're working on
absolutely
production.
key. And it's, for me, it's about creating that atmosphere where everybody are working towards like a big common
Yeah.
output.
That's interesting because we had the director Steve Hughes on not so long ago, and one of the big things he said was how he likes to make his set calm, relaxed, and he does job swaps. So different people will have a quick go at doing something so that people are learning skills. You make sure everybody's comfortable because that way, once everyone's comfortable, they can do their best work, not screaming and shouting at people.
Yeah, but also creating that feeling of collaboration on set.
Yeah, that everybody's
And people appreciating each other's jobs.
Exactly. Everybody's viewpoint is worth something.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's the way I approach it. I think every director has a different way of approaching it, but I think so. Yeah, communication is in that sense is very important.
Yeah.
I remember on the first day of the shoot of my first feature film, I gathered everybody in a room, and I wanted to express my gratitude to everybody for being there, and because it had been such a big lead up to that point, you know, almost 20 years had been leading me to that point. It was quite an emotional point for me, and I remember when I addressed people, I had tears in my eyes, and I think it wasn't consciously, but afterwards, people said to me that in hindsight, they felt that was actually that in that moment, it brought people together because they could see how passionate I was about this film, and suddenly kind of just made people go, okay, let's just up our game here because this is going to be, this could be really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So obviously you've done both corporate and drama based stuff. How do the two differ? Are there any overlaps, or are they just chalk and cheese?
It's hard to say. It's hard to describe that precisely because in one way there is no overlap at all. Writing and directing and you know, when I make a corporate film, I'm usually the cameraman, I'm usually the editor, I'm usually the person who liaises with the client, and I will find the music and I will deliver it, and I will, you know, send out the invoice and make sure it gets paid. It's so different to when you sit down, you know, with a blank page and try to write something you feel is important to say or something you're passionate about. There's almost no comparison.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I shoot and film and edit a corporate film, I use a lot of those skills that I use when I make films.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like somebody saying to us, you know, so you've done this TV drama and you've also done adverts.
You use the same tools,
How does
don't
it
you?
differ? Well, you know, it differs massively, but at the same time, you're still using the same tools to do it.
So it's the same tools, but a different language. Because I have all the skills needed to put together corporate films, that definitely helps me with all the technical aspects of making films. And it probably gives me a confidence that, you know, if one day on a film set, the boom operator doesn't turn up, I know how to hold the boom. I know how to get, you know, decent sound. I could be part of the editing process. I know, you know, which kind of edits doesn't work and which edits does work.
And those skills as well will help you communicate with people on a feature because you know how to do it. You can speak to them in their language almost. The language of the editor, the language of the boom operator. And so because you've been there and you've done it, you know exactly how to communicate things.
And that brings us neatly to the subject of communication between a director and a composer.
Yes. So you and Dan have worked together on feature film Seagull, your first feature. What was the communication like between you both? And can you tell us a bit about your working process for that film between you and Dan?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, we probably started with having a conversation about what the project was about.
Yep.
And how I envisioned it, what I wanted it to be. I listened to some of your music. I could instantly tell that you had the qualities to be able to do something that would suit my work. So that was the initial thing, and then I guess it was a conversation about the themes. And
we got together and had a chat. You gave me a script, and you printed out a script, and it was bound, and it was lovely. And you made a big thing of saying, "Look, I want to give you a script because I want to give you a script that's something that's physical, that you can sit down and you can read." And having had lots of PDFs and things over the years, it really does make a difference having the physical thing in front of you, because, you know, I could be on the sofa downstairs and the kids could have some horrible thing on the telly and it didn't matter. I could still go through and for some unknown reason, the physical thing of actually having it was, but yeah,
and I suppose also this, you're saying it's beautifully bound. Peter was giving you something very valuable there.
Yeah.
It's like the keeper of the keys kind of thing.
Yeah, but it was great because from reading the script, I got a clear idea of the tone of the film and a clear idea about the characters as well. And from that, I then spent a day just creating ideas for it. And it was literally, I don't think there were any strings or anything in there. I think it was just piano and like a synthesizer. Really minimalistic sketches. And sent them over to you, and you would like, great, thanks very much. And then didn't hear anything for a while. And then once they started editing and stuff, a lot of those pieces of music found their way into what was the temp score. So some of the movie was edited to my music.
It was very useful actually to have all of that stuff.
I mean, there was,
and knowing that it came from the composer, it wasn't something that the composer had to go and reproduce somewhere.
Yeah.
Let me just go one step back. So I think, am I right in remembering that I gave you a playlist on Spotify?
Yeah? Yes.
Because the James Abbott, I co-wrote the script with, he produced like a playlist on Spotify, and I think he used that for writing. And then I started using that playlist as well and put that on just to set the score as you with the headphones on and starting writing. And I think I passed it on to you as well. You
did pass it on to me as well, yeah. And once that happened, because it was quite a long period of time, it wasn't a short period of time. We had the luxury of time on this. But the next thing we did is we got together and you had a rough cut of the film. Yeah. And we sat and watched it and went through and talked about the characters, talked about the mood, talked about, typical spotting session really, where we wanted music to come in, where we didn't want music, where we felt something might need it, where we felt we should definitely leave it alone, those kind of things. And I think it was a couple of months later, I then got another edit. I hadn't done anything at this point, and then I started working on ideas to picture. But there was 3 big scenes that were still in flux, shall we say, at that point. But the opening was there. The first 8.5 minutes of the movie don't actually have any dialogue.
Yeah. True.
So it relied heavily on the sound.
It relied heavily on the sound, yeah. Which was great in one aspect because, it gets you to...
no pressure.
To spread your wings. But exactly, the other side of that is, oh God.
Yeah.
The music had to carry, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. And I think it took us a while to get... There's a... sort of the second section of the start is where this character decides she's leaving where she is and she's going to go back to Folkestone. And it's a lot of beautifully shot stuff where she's walking over the unbelievably picturesque white cliffs. And it looks lovely. It took us a while to get the music right for that bit.
I think you've talked about that before.
Yeah, I had quite a few goes at that.
But isn't that the scene where, because we were talking about you putting in the kitchen sink and then gradually taking everything out?
Yes.
And it ended up being quite minimalist.
Yes.
In the end.
It was piano, tiny little bit of synth and strings.
That was quite often the process, was that I would come in and then you'd play what you'd made and then I would suggest to removing things.
There was a lot of sculpting. So it'd start off, and I am very much a kitchen sink type of person, throw everything at it and then start culling until you end up with what's
what's there. Now, I think that a lot of that happened at the sort of like the second edit. And then when I got the final edit, it was more tweaks and revisions rather than once I'd written stuff. It would be little bits like there's a fight scene in the bunker and there's a couple of bits and I'd put some hits in and stuff. And Peter was like, no, over-egging it. Don't need to do that. We've established the mood. You know, the action speaks for itself. You don't need to... There's no need to add anything. And so I took those out. And it was little things like that. Real small things towards the end.
Talking about those kind of over-egging things, I think we were talking about the difference between TV and film.
Yes. Yeah.
And you often find TV is a lot more... The music is a lot more telling.
Yeah.
It's almost like trying to grab you, trying to stop you from changing channel. Where in a cinema, you kind of, you're locked in a cinema for an hour and a half or 2 hours, so you're not going to go anywhere. So you don't need to push.
Yeah,
that.
I think
so sometimes simplicity can be.
I think that's
more
true.
powerful.
You've got the luxury of time in a film to establish stuff a bit more, unless you're doing a massive episodic thing where, again, you've got X amount of time to be able to really introduce themes and ideas and motifs and do stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. I think on telly, and it does tend to be, it's getting more and more wall-to-wall telly, so it's just like there's just music everywhere. And with film, you can just stand back. I mean, obviously, it depends on the film,
But we've also spoken about the power of silence and, having a moment of just letting a scene, the atmosphere in a scene, be what it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be described by the music or supported by the music.
There was a very touching scene in Seagull, and I'd scored it. Really playing on the tear-jerking side of it. And Peter said, "The performance is just so good. I don't think we need it. I think you're leading the audience there, and they don't need it.
That's the danger.
They're
isn't it?
already there. They don't need that.
Yeah.
So we just cut the whole thing, and thank God we did, because it was much better."
Well, there you go. It's a bonus track on the album.
Bonus track on
But
the
also,
album.
I think you need some. Music can be more powerful when it's next to silence.
Absolutely.
And silence
right,
can be more powerful next to
Yes.
music.
It's contrast,
it's
isn't
about
it?
finding that balance, because if you've got music all the way through, I think at the end your ears are going to be tired of listening to music, and if you have a silent movie then with no music in, they can also be quite challenging to watch.
Yeah. I think
Very
you
much so.
you can become almost immune to music if it's just pummeled at you. It's just something you just switch off from it.
And I think it has been a criticism of TV drama, hasn't it? That the music is too wall to wall.
Yeah.
But when people get it right, it can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
In a production.
So we did think towards the end we were doing sort of once a week, occasionally twice a week. I think you came over just to review.
Yeah. When we were getting towards the end,
When
we
we
knew we were doing. It was just minor tweaks.
It was just minor tweaks at that point, but I think it all stemmed from me reading that script, coming up with those ideas, and then that being populated through the film. It was all of my ideas. None of them were. I did one moody one, which did make it through to the temp, but it did tone-wise. It was so different from everything else. There was a lot of just having drones underneath certain scenes. So just really low, but it made such a big difference. That's really subtle stuff.
You've been very good at that on this album as well, where, you were soloing something earlier and you're saying, have a listen to this. And it was the Space Echo over... it was the Ibanez...
It was the Ibanez HD 1000.
Yeah. And it was just these weird tones going in and out of each other, but just sitting low in the mix.
It was just really low in the mix.
Just making everything a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would really recommend, and definitely next time I do that, I would ask my composer to come up with ideas before we start doing the editing.
Oh, yeah.
It was really useful to have that, and it helps you with the edit rather than on my short films in the past. I've just found music that I thought was good, and then it's been a case of the composers trying to reproduce something similar.
And it's all about the working relationship. It's all about that. So if you can get someone that is good to work with, someone that's approachable, can take criticism, realizes it's not all about them.
Dan's working on that.
Yeah, I'm working on that. And then you can work with them, and you get in early as well. Definitely get in as early as possible. Then only good things are going to come from that.
Well, you got in early enough that you ended up on the temp score.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, how perfect is that?
Yeah.
So you're not, I mean, we've gone backwards and forwards on the temp score about, trying to replicate someone else, but actually it's intended as a useful tool, and it is. But it depends on the director. It depends on how close they want the sound.
Yeah.
Steve was very right in saying he will put something on as a starting point. This is the general mood that I want for this scene. And I think in that way, it's a really useful tool.
Steve also mentioned that he will only ever use one composer, so he wouldn't sort of cherry pick from scores from all sorts of different composers and then make a temp score for his movie or whatever. Use that. He would say, right, it's going to be this composer and I can only use his music or her music and put that in and do it that way.
Steve's going to be listening to this going, yeah, or, no, I didn't say that at all. Hi, Steve, by the way.
But he says that because he doesn't want these vast changes in style and tone all the time. I have worked on stuff that's been temped with whatever was the big score that year, plus what was clearly the editor's favourite other scores, and it can jump about massively, and it's really off-putting.
Does it put you under pressure? Of delivering something
a little bit, because you are trying to second guess, and sometimes in TV you don't get the luxury of having a chat, and the amount of times that spotting sessions are cancelled because they're too busy. But directors can only be on a project for like 2-3 months, and then they're off. If it's a big episodic TV thing, they can only be on it for X amount of time, then they're off. And if they're off on the next job, they're not going to want a spotting session with somebody who's working on their last job. So I get it, but it does mean it can be quite difficult, because then you're not entirely sure who you're pleasing. So, who's in charge, who's the one, and it's the execs, it'll be the exec producers, but it's who you're trying to please. And if it's jumping about stylistically and it's all over the shop and you're trying to second guess exactly what it is that they want, then it can be very tricky.
I guess that's another difference between making a feature and doing TV.
Yes.
I think there's maybe a bit more care and attention into, or it tends to be more of a director's vision.
Yes.
When you're making feature films.
And it's producer's vision in TV.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, well, this is something we've asked a couple of our guests. How do you feel about music, and how do you feel it fits into storytelling?
I love putting music together with images, and it's one of the things when I make corporate films as well. I love spending some time just picking the right track. It's almost like when you in fiction, when you see your first cut of something, it can feel kind of quite raw, and the performance and the direction is on display. And then there's the temptation of if you add some nice music to it, then suddenly it's going to look or feel much better, and as a director you feel a bit more safe. But anyway, that it's so important. I think I remember the first time I watched the opening sequence of Seagull with the music that you put together, and I remember I had sort of tears in my eyes. I had a feeling that this was actually going to be okay. No one was going to laugh.
They were good tears.
Yeah, there were good tears. Good tears.
I've been on the receiving end of both.
God, yeah. But for me, music is really, really important in fiction work. I mean, I know that some directors prefer not to use music so much. I like music, and I love sitting down, watching a movie and just letting the music take over and direct the story.
I think there's I'm going to use Seagull just because it's what we both worked on, but I think there's a scene in Seagull where two of the main characters come out of the house and there's been some graffiti put on the side of the house. And in this scene, they come out, they see this graffiti, then one's the granddad, one's the little girl. She gets taken to school. He then goes to a hardware store to buy new locks for the house, scrubs the wall, and then it's tea time. And this is all in about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And as a collection of images, it works, but what it needed was something it's an A to B.
Tie it together.
And it needed to be tied together. And just a simple piano motif and some strings just going over the top of it, highlighting the mood that was going through the main character's head of the day, an uncertain, not sure what's going on, this isn't great mood, just helped gel
I think
scene.
it's something I'm reading a bunch of scripts at the moment, and quite often you get to a point where it says montage, and then there's a series of things that happens, like all within one page, which will take maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And obviously, you can only do things like that, strung together with music, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to feel disjointed and you're not going to understand.
Or in the case of Shaun of the Dead, ending up in the Winchester, there's a voiceover, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here's the plan.
Here's the plan, yeah. But that's got music behind it as well.
Does it?
I think so.
Probably.
Maybe.
Sure.
Actually, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong.
Comedy sound effects.
Yeah,
definitely.
But then Team America World Police has got the montage bit, where it's got a song that's all about a montage. And at the end it goes, as the song starts fading out, it's this training montage, as it starts fading out, you can hear them going, always fade out on a montage. Yeah, brilliant.
It's fantastic. So Seagull will be coming out.
It's already had its UK premiere at Liverpool
great.
Film Festival. So we're still waiting to hear back from more festivals, and hopefully we'll get it out sometime next summer.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so look out for that, everybody. Another question we ask all of our guests is, what advice would you give to your younger self, or to other aspiring directors, or indeed to anyone thinking about getting into the industry?
Well, I think anybody who wants to get into the industry, my advice is just, work as hard as you can, find a runner job, work your nuts off, and get to know some people and see where that may take you.
Mm.
Advice for myself is probably, I think I've spent a lot of my time in my 30s where I was sort of lacking in confidence in my own work. I think in my 20s, I was quite confident about myself and my work, and I thought I could probably, become the next big shot director. And then the 30s kicked in, and then suddenly I started doubting myself and whether I could really pull this off and whether I had anything to say. And then I think maybe in my 40s I kind of decided to throw all that away and decide that actually I could pull this off. I can do this, and I am good enough to be here. So yeah, if I could give myself an advice, it would probably be, forget about all the negative voices you have in your head. It's a creative medium, and you're always gonna struggle, getting your vision out of your head and into reality and make it look and feel and sound as good as possible. But I think all filmmakers, like from the lowest, from the newest, short filmmakers to, Steven Spielberg, I'm sure everybody has the same self-doubt that I have. So nobody's, why put yourself down?
Good advice.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really nice to
Well, thank you very much for having me.
be in the same room as you.
Yeah. What a
Absolutely
novelty.
fantastic. Danny Mulhern writes on Facebook, a new podcast to add to the mix. Looking forward to listening through the Making a Soundtrack back catalogue. And I believe Danny Mulhern has some drama credits to himself. Silent Witness, no less.
Silent Witness, yeah, and What They Had was a film that I think last year.
Thank you very much, Danny. Thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Danny.
It's very nice of you.
It is indeed. So, speaking of the socials, we put out a poll asking what we should do with our album once we were finished. And we had 4 things you could vote for: approach music libraries, self-release, wait for an opportunity, and I've replied with my idea.
No one replied, did they?
No one replied with my idea, no. But we did have a clear winner with 50% of the vote, and that was self-release. Interesting.
No, it's nice to dip the toe and actually start thinking about what we're going to do with it. We've touched on it briefly, haven't we? But
Yeah.
we are, like you said the other day, about 3/4 of the way through the album now. So
Yeah, so we should really have a plan for it.
yeah, a plan A at least.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Is that a wrap?
I believe that's a wrap.
Excellent.
That's a wrap.
How do you find us? Makingasoundtrack.com will tell you all you need to know. There are links to the podcast, social media links, and there's information about us as well.
And if you're enjoying the podcast, it would make our day if you could give us a positive rating or review. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit that share button and recommend it to someone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.